So if you saw our video we shared where we showed you this Cub Cadet 2284 that we brought home. This is a Super Cub with a 22 horsepower Kohler Command V twin. The thing was running pretty decent, and then every once in a while you'd have to run it with the choke partially on. Then I noticed that on the one axle tube there was some gas dripping down from the tank. Wasn't quite sure where that was coming from. Then it would just die. Just starve for fuel, it would just die. So we figured it was time to dive into the fuel system on this thing and see what was going on. I don't believe it's carburetor related. I believe, definitely we want to start back here at the fuel tank and work our way front, and I think that will solve the majority of our issues. But, the biggest reason why we're going to start back there is I saw that gas was leaking onto the axle tube, and I definitely want to get that taken care of. Now, as many of you know, and many of you can probably guess, one project leads to another project, leads to another project, and then you end up with projects within projects. So to get this project started, to get down to that fuel tank, we got to start by taking the seat off so we can get the fender pan off to get down to the fuel tank. That ends up being a project within the project. Now, getting the seat off the fender pan became a project within a project within a project. And you can see by all the oil and dirt all over the fender pan here that it took a lot of patience, a lot of persuasion, and a bit of lubrication to get that seat moving. And you have to get the seat to move in the track to be able to get to the bolts that are in the track that hold the seat track and everything down to the fender pan on one of these Cub Cadets. So that was a bit time consuming, but we accomplished that, got it done, and we're ready to move on. Now, in addition to the hardware that holds the seat down to the fender pan, you also have to remove 2 bolts on either side of the fender pan down where the fenders attach to the floorboards to be able to remove the fender pan. So after you got the 4 bolts out of the seat and you got the 2 bolts on either side that hold the fenders to the floorboards, you got to take the gas cap off, and then you're ready to wiggle this entire fender assembly up off of the tractor frame. Now, I should add here too, you've got the wires for your seat and all that stuff that you got to pull through that grommet there. And ours didn't have the wires hooked up or connected for the taillights, but if yours has taillights and they're connected yet, you do have to unplug them too, or you're going to get hung up on those when you go to completely pull off the fender pan. And after the fenders are out of the way, then here we are down to our fuel tank, and you can see that this is a lovely mess, nice and dirty on top. And what we're going to do here is we're going to connect this vent line or breather line, whatever you want to call it there, that goes between one side of the tank to the other. Just that way when we're pulling this thing up out of here and maneuvering it all around, that way if there is anything in the tank, it's not going to come spilling out when we kind of flip the tank up to get it out of here. And you can see, just flip it up a little bit and it pulls right out of there. There's no straps or anything holding it down. And now that we got it up here out of the way, we can see what we're doing and get to our fuel lines and disconnect them, and we'll have the tank completely free. So here's a look at some of the problem that we were having. The grommet here around this fuel shutoff valve was just brittle. And when you put gas in the tank, the gas was kind of running out around this grommet and just dripping down on the axle housing. And this is the one on the left side of the tractor. And there's also a valve with a grommet just like this on the right side of the tractor. So we had the thing running, like we said. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, this valve here is just plugged completely solid, so it must have been getting the gas from the other side, right? Well, if you were guessing that, you are wrong, because it turns out both of these valves were just plugged absolutely solid. So we're going to replace those valves. We're going to replace the fuel lines back here, from one side of the tank to the other. We're going to get everything cleaned up here underneath the fuel tank and make sure this stuff is all good to go before we put it back together. And it turns out the dirt wasn't just on the outside of the tank. Here's some of the stuff that's inside the tank. You can see there's a good bit of it laying down in there, and that's what leads to those fuel shutoff valves just being plugged solid and gas not being able to flow. So we're going to clean out this gas tank, and we're also going to clean off the outside of it so that we can check it out and make sure there isn't any other holes or cracks or anything like that, any other places where it might be leaking at. Now we're going to get ready to put everything back together. We picked up 2 brand new fuel shutoff valves, and you can see they still have the screens on them. So that'll keep a lot of that dirt and debris out of there and keep them from being plugged completely solid. And we picked up 2 new fuel tank bushings that will help seal up the fuel tank where the shutoff valves go in the bottom. So their fuel tank all cleaned up. We got it upside down here so it's easier to see what we got going on. You're going to push the new fuel tank bushings into the holes in the bottom of the tank, and then push in the new fuel shutoff valves into the bushing. You don't want to put the bushing on the valve and then try to put it in, because it's never going to happen. After we get both of our bushings and our new shutoff valves in there, then we're going to find our old fuel line and get some measurements from it, and we're going to replace the fuel line that connects one side of the tank to the other underneath the tank. So again, we have our fuel tank flipped upside down so you can see all this. So it's actually going to be flipped back over, and then that fuel line will be on the bottom when we go to put it back in the tractor. So we got everything done on the bottom side of the tank, flip it over, set it back down in the frame. Then we cut a new piece of fuel line to go from the left side to the right side. In the back there is a kind of like a breather line between the 2 sides of the tank. Then we ran a new fuel line from the T, where the 2 lines come together under the tank, all the way up to where our fuel filter used to be, and we installed a new fuel filter. Now, I prefer to have a clear fuel filter in line with my power equipment whenever I can. So we put this clear one in here, and then we ran another piece of hose from the fuel pump down to the fuel filter. So everything from the fuel pump back to the tank is brand new now. Well, not just new, but also cleaned out, so we don't have to worry about a mess like this anytime soon. So now we just got to get our wires back in line, and then we'll set our fenders down on top of the fuel tank, back into position, and pull the wires up through the grommet there in the fender pan. And you'll know that everything is lined up with your fender pan when that grommet actually goes down through the hole in the frame underneath the fender pan where your wires come up through, and everything just sits down nice and flush. So then once you have everything lined up, you can start connecting your wires like your fuel level gauge here, and you can put the seat back on there, fasten it down, and then fasten your fender pan to the floorboards again with the 4 bolts that you took out of there when you're pulling everything apart. Now we finally got our seat back on, we got our fenders back on, our fuel tank is back in, it's nice and clean inside and out. We have new bushings in the bottom of the fuel tank, new shutoff valves in the fuel tank, new fuel lines from the fuel tank all the way up through to the fuel pump. We have everything cleaned up and pressure washed from the fenders all the way on down to the frame. And you probably noticed that the back cover to our frame is now missing off of this tractor. Well, when I was pressure washing everything, I noticed the bolts were loose that hold it on there. And when I got the tools out to tighten them up, I thought, I'm just going to take this off for now because I need to modify this anyway. So, if you want to see what we did there, you're going to have to wait for the next episode that we have coming up featuring our 2284 Super Cub, and we show you how we modified the back plate on the frame so we could get a little bit more use out of this Cub Cadet. Alright, we're going to wrap up this video here before we give out any more information about our next video we got coming up, where we show you how we modified this plate here for the back of our Super Cub. So be sure to subscribe, and thanks for watching.